Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, this is Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get any sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask that you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. The Saretsky Report for July 2019 is now out. I apologize for the lengthy delay, obviously with the long weekend and getting through all the stats and etc. Took me a couple more days, so there's a link to that report below. But one thing I want to touch on, not only in that report, but in this video, which will be part of the context of it all, is I always find it amusing going back and looking through the comments on each one of these videos. And it's funny because you have sort of two different people, and it's almost like there's never anyone that's sort of in between. It's one person's commenting that housing is going to fall, 86%, and it's going to officially bottom, and on May 15th, 2022. And then the other people are saying, prices can never drop because it's Canada, and we live on this sort of remote, quote unquote island, and it's exempt from any sort of global factors, or any sort of global factors that create some sort of turmoil will automatically result in money flooding into Vancouver. And I always find it funny because at the end of the day, these videos and these reports are put out to actually highlight and put an analysis on the housing market. To the best of my ability, I spent a lot of money on data sources. I spent a lot of money compiling the data through various software programs, and a lot of that is ultimately to advise not only my clients, but also people within the industry. So whether that's working with hedge funds, developers, I know that, for me personally, I have some of the people, CEOs of some of the largest mortgage providers in Canada, subscribe and reading to my newsletter. So I can't just be consistently putting out some sort of bearish and false information. Otherwise, I'm pretty confident these people would not subscribe to my report. So the job here through these videos and through these reports is always to provide you the information as I see it coming through. And so what I want to get to is this point is that obviously I have a thesis around the markets, and certainly I think there are a lot of headwinds that still surround the Canadian real estate and the Canadian economy, and particularly that is the household debt. I would argue the household debt bubble that we have. But again, how long can that be suppressed, and how long can that be manipulated? Obviously, we're starting to see that through low interest rates. And I think that what we're seeing right now in the Vancouver housing market, as you'll read in the report, is July had a huge bounce in home sales. Now, sales bounced on lower prices, but I think what I'm seeing, not only in the data, but also from a feet on the ground perspective, is basically we have prices down anywhere from 12% to upwards of 40% if you're in the high end of the market. Prices are down. You have mortgage rates absolutely plummeting, where people now are getting 5-year fixed mortgages at 2.79%. And you still have an economy today that is at full employment. And so, in my opinion, you still have the backdrop to allow a sort of, not necessarily a re-stimulation, but some conditions that are helping ease some of the softness in the housing market. And so what I'm saying is I think that what is certainly a likely or possible scenario is that over the next, potentially in the back half of this year, I'm not convinced that we'll necessarily see a continued drop in prices. I think that as of right now, we have low rates along with confidence, which is the labor market, temporarily at least, supporting home valuations. I certainly still feel like prices are kind of trickling down, but it's so marginal, and I think that given this recent bump, not only in sales, but the drop in inventory is sort of enticing people back in. Just to give you an example, I have clients, none of my clients, for example, are getting rejected for mortgages, right? So I think we're still in this very lax environment where rates are low, banks are still pretty eager to lend despite B20. It's very easy still to get a loan. Like people generally speaking aren't getting rejected, and if they do, there's alternatives to get around that. So we can actually see is residential mortgage credit growth, which I've highlighted this number of times, is still very, very weak, but it has certainly been growing over the last couple months. As you can see, the month-over-month growth here in residential mortgage credit growth. So still weak from a historical context, but certainly picking up. And I think that highlights not only the strength, particularly in Eastern Canada, in that housing market, but also just the impact of the lower rates, which are ultimately feeding through. And I think majority of this is come from the labor market. So if you're going to ask me what I think is the next catalyst that's going to impact Canadian real estate, I think that it has to come from a recession and weakness in the labor market. As long as rates are low and people are, we're right now enjoying full employment, that there's still confidence to actually go and borrow money. Like you've probably recently got a wage increase, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as long as those conditions are there, I think that at least help put a floor under home prices. So that's my view today. Of course, I think there's larger structural problems with the market, which we can certainly talk about. One of those being, are we nearing that recession? And if we are nearing that recession, how much of that Canadian household debt is going to, how are Canadians going to weather that storm? And I think right now, again, just to give you a little bit of context on the market here, I've posted this chart before, but what we can see is the number of foreclosures in Vancouver is very low. It is bottom and it's beginning to start to tick upwards. But just to give you a context, the West Vancouver luxury housing market, the detached housing market, which has seen prices conservatively fall anywhere between 30 to 40%. Prices have dropped 30 to 40%, and they've been down now for about a year and a half, 2 years. There's currently for sale, there's 5 active foreclosure listings on the MLS system. Now, I understand that foreclosures are a lagging indicator, but that really just goes to show you that conditions are still decent within the economy, within the banking system, that banks are still doing workarounds. A lot of this is still sort of filtering through the system. And so I just find that very fascinating to see that we're just in this very strange sort of environment. But I think, it's interesting to sort of see is we talk about sort of recessions and how that might impact the labor market. And obviously that will impact housing, because in order to get a mortgage, you need a job. And as long as you have a job and wage growth, banks are going to be happy to lend you a loan. So, global manufacturing indexes are all pointing down, and there's significant weakness in Asia and in Europe. There's a reason why almost every single central bank in the world is slashing interest rates. They obviously understand what is going on. I think that they're extremely nervous, given, you're cutting rates, negative rates, even more negative. So I'm not sure how stimulative those are going to be, but it's just funny to see. I'm just going to put up this chart here. It's funny, this was circulating on social media the other day. Is the Bank of Canada is perhaps arguably the most hawkish central bank in the entire world. So they're still thinking that they're going to be hiking interest rates. They're looking at the data and saying, well, look how great the Canadian economy is. Meanwhile, everywhere else is slowing down and deteriorating, and all these central banks are cutting interest rates. Yet Bank of Canada and the Canadian economy, everything here is just like this, in this sort of fantasy land. And you'll also to look at it is the entire Canadian credit market, the entire curve is below the Bank of Canada's overnight interest rate of 1.75%. So over 80% now, you'll see in this chart, this is the most inverted the Canadian yield curve has been inverted since the year 2000. 80% of the curve of spreads are now negative. And so that's like a telltale recession sign. Again, I'm not saying that means the recession is imminent, but certainly this has been a very good historical indicator of the direction of the economy. But it's just amazing to see all this data coming out, and just to see all these central banks cutting interest rates, and the Bank of Canada continues to have this hawkish tone. We're not cutting rates. I saw one economist the other day, or there's this consensus that suggests that the Bank of Canada will be on hold until 2020. But believe me, if all these central banks are cutting interest rates, the Bank of Canada will be cutting interest rates. That is without a doubt. So that's kind of my thoughts on the market. I continue to be amazed just to see all these distortions, and I think that's what I've tried to emphasize in these videos as well over time, is that despite the reality of that, housing is quote unquote overvalued, and it should certainly fall back into this realm that matches wages and a relative proportion of incomes, is that the markets now are so distorted that they'll never reach that level because central banks and governments simply won't allow things to clear. So just to give you an example, I believe it was the Danes in Denmark. They just sold a 10-year mortgage bond with a negative interest rate. So it was the first time ever that a mortgage bond of that duration has sold with a negative interest rate. So what does that mean? Like who buys a negative interest rate? So basically what you're saying is, I think it was a negative 10 basis points. So basically you're going to give them your money, and at the end of the 10 years, they're going to pay you less than what you initially paid. So they're guaranteeing you a loss. So you think, okay, well, why would anybody buy this? Well, the primary reason is because you buy it on the belief or the hope that rates will actually go even more negative, i.e. if rates go even more negative, the price of that bond basically goes up. And so you're basically banking on sort of quote unquote capital appreciation. But that's just how distorted the markets have become. So I always like to put that into context, because I think, you can't just look at Canadian real estate or Vancouver real estate or the Canadian economy in this vacuum. I think that you have to look globally and see there are so many distortions in so many financial markets and in so many economies and in so many central banks. So that's kind of my thoughts on the market. It's kind of my thoughts here. I think I'm very curious to see how the next 3 to 4 months sort of shape up. I still think there are obviously those structural problems, but I think that as of right now, I feel that the credit environment in Canada is still very supportive of borrowing and is helping to put that floor under housing. And I think that's why we're still seeing significant strength in Eastern Canada, and I think that we're starting to see some signs of early stabilization in Western Canada. So anyways, hope that video helped. Otherwise, see you next week.